structures are safer than shallow structures. That is not necessarily the case. Tunnels, and then the last misconception here, tunnels do not collapse or suffer other damage in earthquakes, and that's simply not true. So in studying this topic to prepare this presentation, what I found remarkable is that there is so much information that is very easily available to disprove these myths. And it's hard for me to understand how such misinformation persists these days, even amongst practitioners. Okay, so this is from a paper that was published a few years back in a review paper where it talks about damage to tunnels from earthquakes in going back as early as 1906 San Francisco and 1923 Kanto in Japan. So some of these are well-known, well-studied cases that are early in the 1900s. But then also more recently, some very well-studied cases like 1999 in Taiwan, the Jiji earthquake, and then also more recently Japan 2004 and China 2008. Many more cases were studied. And so you see these numbers in the right-hand column. There are not just dozens, but actually hundreds of cases of damaged tunnels, damaged by earthquakes that have been studied by engineers. So this is actually a well-studied topic. I mentioned a few of these, but the other earthquakes in Japan that have been carefully studied also include 1978 and then the Kobe earthquake in 1995. In that case, I won't show it here, but there was a collapse of an underground station. So the large vaulted ceilings of an underground space like a subway station can collapse, and did in the Kobe earthquake in Japan. I'm just going to limit my comments here and this review to tunnels specifically, but underground stations also would need to be built extremely strong. So proximity to large earthquakes that have severe ground motions can result in damage or even the collapse of tunnels. Damage and collapse of tunnels has occurred even in newly built and very strong tunnels in advanced nations with many extremely well-documented cases. And the picture in the lower left is actually from Turkey. This is a tunnel along the Trans-European motorway, and in fact, this case, it takes a bit more explanation. We can come back to it, but this is a total collapse that you're looking at there. So it was while the tunnel was under construction that occurred. I'm sorry, back up. Okay. And then the Longxi Tunnel in China collapsed in 2008. Again, this is a lot of these are examples of relatively modern construction and engineering design tried to take into account potential damage from earthquakes, and yet these failures occurred. One thing to note here is that upper left photograph shows what's called a portal collapse. So the entrances at either end of the tunnel need to be well designed so that you don't have rockfall or landslide damage at the ends. And then the internal photographs show you examples of the kinds of cracking that can occur when a tunnel is compressed. It's called ovalization, so you take a circular tunnel in cross-section and the shaping can actually compress it and make it an oval shape, and that will result in cracking of different kinds that have been very carefully documented. Fault goes right through a tunnel, and there have been cases where that has occurred, like the 1999 Jiji earthquake in Taiwan. There was one such case. So actually a tunnel can be offset. And then the other ones show the types of cracks that can occur either in the top and the spalling of concrete or diagonal cracks through a tunnel. And this is just a summary of the many cases studied by Wang et al. In a very important paper in 2001. Another earlier paper, Yoshida, 1999, reviewed this topic as well and showed ways in which one can design a tunnel to avert some of the kinds of damage that would otherwise occur. So you want to make your tunnels straight, you want to have your connections heavily reinforced, and so forth. So best practices have also been recommended. And here's another one, design countermeasure. So Steve actually just showed you an example of this where the plan would be that where the tunnels would cross faults, that they would do this kind of jacketing to make the tunnel especially strong. And this is not only important in fault crossings, but also where you have stiff ground, like what's shown here on the right, to softer ground shown on the left. And so not only at fault crossings, not only at active fault crossings, but faults that are not considered active, and also at strong transitions from soft to weak ground, this kind of jacketing can help to prevent collapse and failure. So here are proposed routes. The F7 route, as Steve just presented, is the one that's currently still being considered, but the other two take alternative paths, and you can see these in some of the other documents about 710 tunnel alternatives. And I've shown here, I hope this laser will work. Okay, so the yellow line is the Eagle Rock Fault Zone, and this is the Raven Fault coming across in orange. I've kind of darkened, taken the map layer and let the base imagery come through for you so you can see the faults a little better in this image, and the squares show the fault crossing points. So the F2 tunnel actually only has one fault crossing, and it's on a considered to be less active section of the Raven Fault, whereas the other two have two crossings each. And then I've highlighted those lines, and then I'm going to just punch through these slides. So now let's take a look at that from the south. If I can get the slide to advance. There we go. So at the south end, the elevation here, you see, this is the number 7 alternative coming right up into Pasadena, and we're across those faults. What I'm going to show you next is something that occurred to me that I think would be something that would be taken into account. Apparently, only this tunnel is still being considered, but these other two, this one has a higher north end, and this one has a lower north end. So when you look at these, I'm sorry, you can't see the elevations on this slide, but this goes from 410 feet up to about 830 and 890 feet, whereas this one is only a slight rise up to 680 feet. So I would think that the lower grade in this tunnel would be an advantage, since you have less exhaust fumes to ventilate and also less brake pad lining fumes to ventilate in that case. So I would think that that would be just a simple advantage based on the topography. Anyway, so that's just all I had. I wanted to wrap it up by saying that this is a recap of that intro slide, that while underground structures are safer than above ground structures, still they need to be carefully designed, and it's expensive to do that in practice. And then these are just a list of things that ought to be done if the tunnel is pursued. Transect as few faults as possible, and in the less active sections of those faults, select a route that is the least steep to minimize ventilation problems. Design and build it very strong, especially at all soil contrast points along, and also faults, whether active or not, especially at active fault crossings.
Compounds and nitrogen oxides in the
Organic
presence of
compounds.
sunlight make ozone. And ozone is the molecule that is monitored, and it's usually what you find in the paper as a measure of whether or not a particular day is smoggy or not will be based on the level of ozone. These are gases. Now the air also contains particles, and that's what I mainly want to talk about. So this chart, my first of the 2 slides, I want to sort of walk you through it because it tells a lot about the nature of particles in the air all around the Earth and what they're made of. So this map shows measurements of particle concentrations in the air at a number of locations around the world. Each of these little pie charts has colored sections corresponding to the different chemicals in the particles.
Okay, now we're going
Green
to take a
are
photo.
organic molecular particles.
Beijing,
Red,
highest pollution.
15 micrograms. The other extreme, I think the lowest concentration one is Macehead, Ireland, which is on the west coast of Ireland, and getting very pristine air off the North Atlantic, has 1.5 micrograms per cubic meter.
Ireland, least particulate matter.
So, I show this to give you an idea of what's in the particles, and we can trace each of these, kind of summarized here in bullet form.
710 study.
The first one is a study of the influence of the freeway on the surrounding community. And I'll get down to that in a second. So the first one were measurements made by USC and UCLA groups in 2002 in a very famous study of the 710 that they showed that the number of airport particles, that's the number of particles per cubic centimeter, downwind of the freeway was 25 to 30 times greater than that upwind of the freeway. So that's a measure of the exhaust. A recent measurement next to the 710 in Long Beach found 155,000 particles per cubic centimeter. The normal level would be about 5,000, and pristine air would be less than 1,000. That's a pretty remarkable level. And then another study by USC and UCLA groups looked at this question of the influence of the freeway, how far away is it felt in terms of the community, and they showed that the freeway was felt in terms of the level of particles about a mile and a half away. And just for reference at the bottom is the traffic on the 710 in terms of diesel trucks per hour. I'll just, and this is the point where I'm going to hand things off to Rob, but those of us in the field, air quality and urban areas, and emissions, etc., have long considered the 710 freeway to be arguably the dirtiest freeway in the country. That really is a function of the heavy-duty truck traffic on the freeway. So with that, thank you.
710, dirtiest freeway in America.
Dr. Seifel, and now we're remembering why this
Southern California, so I was a little disappointed not to see some discussion of this in the presentation of the panel. Next slide, please. I'm going to focus on two types of air pollution. One is the regional air pollution that you see at the top, sort of pollution that blankets large areas of the city, and which is regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. And new findings within the last 20 years about the effects of near roadway pollutants of the type that you might experience if you lived next to or close to the 710 freeway. Next slide, please. A lot of what we know about air pollution comes from studies here in Southern California. The Children's Health Study is a longitudinal evaluation of 12,000 participants in communities throughout Southern California with high and low levels of different types of pollutants, and with children who live near or far from major roadways. And we look at rates of, we've examined rates of respiratory disease among these children to get a handle on the effects of pollution. Next slide, please. So, as I'll give you just a brief summary of results from the Children's Health Study. We found decreased lung function in children in communities with more particles. We found increased school absences from respiratory problems shortly after times when there were high levels of ozone in the communities. We found new onset asthma occurred in children exercising heavily outdoors. in high ozone communities, and we found exacerbation of asthma in children living in high particle communities. I lived in Pasadena, and I would want to know what the health impacts of the increases in the regulated regional pollutants are, both regionally across the basin, but also what the levels of these pollutants would be right at the entrance to the tunnel, where they're likely to be much higher than they would elsewhere. Secondly, I'd like to have the best estimate that could be made of the health impact of the increased local traffic proximity-related pollutants that aren't currently regulated but clearly cause health effects. And I think that the best evidence available would indicate that this expansion would increase exposures and that it'll make people sick. And finally, some questions that aren't often considered in the context of tunnel construction and exposures. What will the exposures be during construction, and what might those special construction effects be? What will the ventilation blow the exhaust out the portals, or will there be additional ventilation stacks? Will there be air filtration, which most tunnels don't have? If there is, what's the evidence that the filtration is effective and will be maintained over the life of the tunnel, in particular for the very small particles that Dr. Seinfeld referred to, and to diesel exhaust parts that's hard to get out. Finish with this slide of a ventilation building from another big tunnel, the Big Pig in Boston.
Okay, the third time is the charm.
Susan
Well, I want to
Mossman.
say what an honor it is to be part of this very illustrious panel. And I have to say that I have no slides to show you, which is unfortunate because they're much more interesting than looking at me for 5 minutes. And my comments tonight will be much less scientifically based, but they are based on years of experience, on conditions that we all share and care about in Pasadena, South Pasadena, and further south through El Sereno, and also based on comments that have been made at advisory committee meetings by experts that at least help me to frame these questions about impacts to historic resources when we consider a proposal such as the 710 extension and now the tunnel option, particularly the one for vehicular traffic, because we have not looked as carefully yet at the option that might include light rail. First, I want to say very quickly that Pasadena Heritage has been opposed to the 710 freeway in any form since our founding 35 years ago. And we've not been alone in expressing those objections. Our fellow organizations, including the Los Angeles Conservancy, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the South Pasadena Preservation Foundation, neighborhoods up and down the freeway route, and in fact the President's Advisory Council on Historic Preservation have all looked at this 4.5 miles and considered that in terms of historic preservation impacts, this is one of the worst transportation proposals in its potential effect on historic structures. I would just comment further that the President's Advisory Council is in fact a national group of preservation experts appointed by the President of the United States, and they have visited our communities twice, which is almost unheard of, and both times made a recommendation not to pursue a project like this because of its impact on communities and historic resources. A district listed on the National Register, or some other form of historic designation. So let me
Or on
mention
the
the
routes.
5 kinds of impacts that we're concerned about for historic buildings. And of course, these pale by comparison to the impact vibration during construction is significant, and it will shake the foundations of these 100-year-old buildings, I believe, no matter how well that is buffered or planned for. If you can imagine 100-year-old foundations and how they are impacted in an earthquake, and consider that the drilling could go on over a period of years and years, the vibration factor and its impact on historic resources will be significant, we fear, and will deserve very careful study. If you think for a moment about constructing the Gold Line ditch or depression through Old Pasadena, when the excavation there was all done by hand in order not to disturb historic foundations, and compare that to the massive machines that we saw pictures of. I have just a minute left, I better talk fast. Construction impact. What will the interchanges that get people from the freeways in and out of these tunnels, particularly in our historic Old Pasadena, do? How will they look, and how will they impact that district? If we could get to the point of the tunnels being completed and the buildings surviving the construction phase, there's bound, according to the experts, to be settlement after the tunnels are constructed, where over time the land will settle back into place after this massive construction. Settlement again can affect the foundations and the very existence of historic buildings. Air pollution, that we've learned a lot about tonight, can impact building materials as well as people and will cause more rapid deterioration. We don't know yet whether additional historic buildings would have to be demolished or relocated, and certainly that would be a serious impact. So because of all the many kinds of concerns about historic buildings and communities here in Pasadena and in our neighboring communities, we have many, many serious questions about the impacts that are possible or even plausible under this scenario, and we will continue to work with all of you to ask those questions and demand serious and complete answers.
Because I was the only one on that board sticking my neck out to try and stop that tunnel. I've got a few friends coming up. You know, as Steve said, I'm an attorney. I'm used to getting beat up. So not a problem. So what does the MTA do? They come and give me an estimate. And I haven't put that on there. And I'm thinking, oh, it's got to be somewhere near 10 billion. It's got to be somewhere near 12 billion. They come to me with an estimate of $2.8 billion. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? How do you base that figure? Oh, well, we just looked at what the costs of the Alaskan Way Tunnel are, which has only just begun, by the way. And you talk about tunnel cost overruns, look at the Big Dig. Originally estimated at $3 billion, ended up at $15 billion, with the cost of money and delay and interest estimated close to $30 billion. So they come and give me a $2.8 billion estimate, and I'm dumbfounded at this. Oh, no, that's what it is, that's what it is. So I go to one of the community outreach meetings, this recent one in La Cañada High School. I think you had something going on in Pasadena at the same time. And lo and behold, sitting in the audience, or sitting at the dais, is one of the principal engineers for AECOM, and I won't say his name because he's going to get in trouble, probably.
AECOM.
And I say, I was told by MTA staff at the highest level that the estimate for this tunnel is $2.8 billion. He says, well, that's impossible. We don't know what the tunnel's going to cost. We can't give you an estimate. I can't give you an estimate. So what this goes to show is to throw a bone, if you will, to the one director who's very much against this. They come up with a $2.8 billion figure and expect us to buy it. Now that $2.8 billion, what that does is, that suddenly makes the tunnel feasible. It suddenly makes it doable. If they came up with a $10 billion price, no, it'll never work. Now it's going to be funded by a public-private partnership. Now what that means is that a foreign company, we're looking at some Spaniards right now that are coming in, are going to essentially buy the tunnel, and they are going to recoup the tolls. Tolls. People say tolls. What do you mean a toll? It's a freeway, isn't it? No, it's not a freeway.
Not free.
They're going to be charging close to $20 a trip to get through that tunnel. $20. I mean, that's ridiculous. And the model for that tolling absolutely includes trucks. Anyone who tells you that we're not going to put trucks in there are lying to you. Because it won't work out.
Trucks, Commerce.
And there's a move going on that now, because they have heard your concerns, and a lot of the concerns are about the particulate matter and the safety issues with trucks. And now at the MTA, this idea sort of bubbled up. Well, maybe we won't put trucks in there. That's a bunch of hogwash. They know it, and I know it too.
MTA lies.
And another thing, those routes that were planned to go through San Rafael and West Pasadena, those were all just straw man arguments. They were
Smoke and
worst
mirrors.
case scenarios designed to scare the public, and then they were just going to pull it away. Oh no, we listen to the public now. There's no more. There's no more San Rafael. This tunnel will not work. This tunnel is an outdated idea. Do the folks in Alhambra and San Marino and Temple City need traffic relief? Yes, by God, they do, but this is not the way to do it. We can do it through light rail. We can do it through putting the freight, all the containers from the port onto rail. The ACE. We can extend the Gold Line. We can put another light rail. We can make small adjustments to the existing roads to make sure that traffic can flow smoothly. This is a huge waste of money. This is someone's legacy that they're trying to build at this point. And it has taken the opposition and
Boondoggle.
the discussion has taken a new turn thanks to you people, especially San Rafael, West Pasadena,